Bueno, pues empieza la charla que creo que todos estamos esperando. Es un privilegio para todos nosotros, tanto los amantes del Amstrad CPC como para nosotros los fundadores de Amstrad Eterno, contar con una persona como Roland Perry, que, como sabéis todos, es el padre del Amstrad CPC. ¿Vale? Antes de cederle el micrófono a él, también nos quiero introducir un poco cómo va a ser esta charla, ¿vale? Porque Roland no nos va a contar una historia, sino que lo vamos a basar en preguntas y respuestas. Ayer tuve el placer de poder pasar la tarde con Roland y estuvimos charlando un poquito, y una de las preguntas que yo le hice fue ¿cuál es su motivación para tomarse la molestia de venir desde Inglaterra hasta aquí a España y hacer estas charlas? ¿Vale? Porque sabéis que no son remuneradas, vienen porque quieren, ¿no? Y me comentó dos motivos. El primero es que él es una persona que le gusta mucho conocer cómo funcionan las cosas y que sabe que muchos de nosotros tenemos interés en saber cómo funciona el Amstrad CPC por dentro. Y en segundo lugar también me dijo que su intención es recaudar fondos para la lucha contra el cáncer. ¿De acuerdo? Entonces, su mujer está enferma de cáncer de pulmón y para él eso es una motivación, pues poder ir a los eventos, dar a conocer esa enfermedad y recaudar fondos. Con lo cual os invito, sin ningún tipo de compromiso, que si queréis apoyar la causa, pues podéis contactar con él directamente o con alguno de nosotros y haremos llegar ese dinero para la lucha contra el cáncer. ¿De acuerdo? Pues llegados a este punto, la primera pregunta que le haré a Roland fue ¿cómo fue su llegada a Amstrad? ¿Vale? ¿Con qué motivo llegó y sus primeras impresiones? Well, Roland, the first question is, how do you get working for Amstrad CPC? In which moment you arrive and why?
I was working for a company in Brentwood in Essex, which is just outside London, and we had helped Amstrad on some projects in the past. For example, they had a CB radio that we helped them fix so that they could go to market with it. When they got into difficulty designing their computer in 1983, they came to us for help, and I did a very quick study to see if we could help, decided yes, and that's when the project got going, and that was the middle of August in 1983.
The second question is, in which products did you work at Amstrad? We know the CPC 464, but what other computers did you work on?
We did one project every year. The first year we did the CPC 464. The second year we did the Amstrad PCW, and there's one of those at the back of the hall there. The year after that we did the PC 1512, which was a 16-bit IBM PC clone, and the year after that we did the 2386, which is a clone of a 386 IBM PC. So it was one project every year. Not every project was complete within the year, so while we were doing the PCW in the second year, we were also doing the 664 and the 6128 and so on.
Okay, and going back to the development of the CPC 464, which was the first project, which were the constraints you had when you arrived there, okay? And also the requirements, okay? Requirements and constraints of the project. I know a big constraint was the time, okay? You have to finish the project in a very close time, but which were the requirements and also the constraints? That's it.
We were very lucky because we already had the keyboard, so we didn't have to worry about that. And we also had the concept, and we didn't have to worry about that, which was a computer with a built-in, well, supplied with a monitor and so on, so there's only one plug and a cassette built in. I had some friends who I'd known since university who were also working in the computer industry, for example, for companies like Acorn, who did the BBC Micro. And what I did was I went on a road trip and visited 5 or 6 different of my friends and said, can you help me with this project? And the first one said, no, we're a bit busy. The second one said, well, you won't tell us who your client is because it was a secret. And the third one said, oh, we're working with Sinclair at the moment, so we can't work with you. Anyway, eventually I found MEJ Electronics and Locomotive Software, who were friends who I already knew, and they agreed to do the project. And they also agreed to do it quickly.
And regarding the other series of Amstrad, the Plus thing, I guess you were not involved in this, no?
The last CPC that I was involved in as project manager was the 6128. After that, I concentrated on the word processors and the IBM clones. So people I had recruited into my team dealt with all of the projects after that.
I think you didn't comment, you worked on the copy protection of the cartridge. Did you comment that already? Okay, I will translate that. Okay, también ha comentado que su implicación en el proyecto fue desarrollar una protección para los cartuchos de la gama Plus, anticopia, ¿vale? Porque querían evitar que el software que se desarrollase para esa nueva plataforma sufriera de la piratería, que sabéis que en los años 80 era muy grande. Ahora voy a pasar a leer algunas de las preguntas que tengo aquí en la retaguardia, ¿vale? The name Arnold, okay? It was like a code name for the project in some moment, no? It was not called Amstrad, but Arnold. I think this comes from your name, but can you explain how you arrived to get to this name?
Amstrad was absolutely certain that nobody should know that they were developing a computer product. So it was a big secret. They wanted to launch it onto the public when it was ready, okay, and not have people understand that it was on the way. So when I went to see the people who might have been recruited as development engineers, I couldn't tell them it was Amstrad. All I could do was tell them it was a big consumer electronics company. And the biggest one in the UK at the time was called GEC, and its chairman was Arnold Weinstock. And so I just put Arnold on the computer, and that made them think that maybe the client was GEC.
Do you remember in which countries the Amstrad CPC was more successful? Okay.
Originally, we only thought it would sell in UK, but later on, Amstrad opened a subsidiary in France, Amstrad France. It had a relationship with Louis Dominguez in Spain, and he said he wanted to distribute it. We had an arrangement with Bernie Schneider, who had a big consumer electronics company in Germany. So it was UK, France, Spain, and Germany to begin with, but I think we sold some in other markets later on.
Now I'm going to ask you about the Roland character, okay? There are many games that from Amstrad that start with the same name, Roland in the Caves, Roland on the Ropes, etc., no? Which is the main reason of having this character, okay? And why it shares the name with you?
I think we wanted to create a brand for the games. We already created a brand for the publisher, which was called Amsoft, which was separate from Amstrad. And we had several games which had a small, very excitable creature in them. And somebody decided who's the most small and excitable person here? Oh, it's Roland, so we'll name these particular games after him.
In one moment in history, okay, Amstrad acquired Sinclair, okay? What was your reaction to this and your thoughts or your opinion in that moment?
Well, Sinclair was a very important company in the computer industry in the UK, and actually had been very useful to us because about half of the games that we sold were conversions from the Spectrum. And that was the reason why we chose the Z80 processor, because it would be easy to convert the games. Unfortunately, Sinclair is a man who has many ideas, but is very bad at manufacturing and quality control. And so, unfortunately, his company went bankrupt because they bought too many computers, or made too many computers for Christmas. They went into the shops, nobody bought them, so he ran out of money. And so what Alan Sugar decided to do was to buy that brand to sell alongside the CPC computers. And as far as I was concerned, that's fine. Lots of companies have two brands. For example, Volvo cars were made by Ford for many years. Nobody seems to have a problem with that.
We have seen that you were in Retro Alacant 2 weeks ago, okay? And they have like a prototype of the Amstrad CPC. I'm not sure if this is a prototype or not, okay? But anyway, it was gray, not black, okay? That color was the one that was thought to be used by the users, and later it was changed to the colorful one we have, or it's just gray because it was a version to be sent to developers and so on?
Okay, so the reason those computers were grey is because the factory that produces the prototypes always made its models in grey. So it doesn't matter what it was a prototype of, it came out in grey, and then later on the customer would decide what colour to actually have the plastic. So it's just I don't know why grey, but it's just kind of like an anonymous colour. So there are two phases of grey computers. We made 5 prototypes using 5 of the keyboards, and we gave those to people working in the development team. Okay? And then a couple of months later, we ordered 50 more and put inside them some electronics which worked the same as the final computer would, even though the parts for the final computer weren't ready, particularly the ROM and the gate array. And we gave those 50 prototypes to people who were writing games and other software. And all of those 50 have a number on the back, on a little paper label. And the one in Alicante, I think, was number 17, for example.
When you decide to leave Amstrad, which was the reason, and when did that happen?
Well, I left Amstrad in probably 1990, so I'd worked there for 6 years. And in my career, I've had very many different jobs. After Amstrad, I worked a lot on early social media platforms, and then I did some work on the internet and so on. So I suppose I sort of get bored easily and want to do something new. So I thought that, 6 years at Amstrad was long enough, and I trained up enough people in my team that they could carry on doing the work for Amstrad.
Ahora voy a buscar las preguntas que alguna gente mandaron por Twitter. And now I will go to the Twitter questions, okay? This is a funny one, maybe. Why did you build the Amstrad 664? Okay. Why did you make the Amstrad 664? Which was the... Why?
Okay, so people ask why the 664. Well, actually, even before the CPC 464 was launched, we designed the DDI-1 external disk drive, and again, there's one of those on display at the back of the hall there. But it was not an all-in-one computer, because you had the Amstrad 464 and then the DDI-1, and you had 2 power cables and lots of cables around the back. And people kept saying to us, well, now that so many games are available on floppy disk, why don't you just build a 464 that's got a disk drive in it? And in fact, our code name for the product was includes disk instead of tape, which actually spells idiot. Idiot. Because we always gave our projects a code name. So the 464 was Arnold, the 664 was idiot, the PCW was Joyce. So we always had an internal code name. So So we designed it, and I think it works very well. But we took it to America, where we'd just started Amstrad USA, and they said to us, "We're very sorry, we cannot sell a 64K computer in America anymore. Everyone demands it has 128K. So we rushed through a development of a 128K version of the 664, and that's what the 6128 is. And so we did it for the Americans, and then I think a little bit later we brought it to Europe, and that meant that the 664 just had a very short life, but it wasn't what we intended to begin with.
Okay, I don't know if you are aware that many consoles and also retro computers are getting newer versions with a mini compact design, okay? So for example, we have the Amiga 500 Mini, okay? It's something you can go to Amazon and buy right now. We also have the NES Nintendo consoles with a reduced size, and this is something very trendy. This was an introduction. They asked, what will be needed to achieve this? No? Many people, and I am included, would like to see a mini Amstrad CPC, okay? It's like a product with an emulator inside or something like this that allows us to easily be able to play those video games, but with an actual monitor, okay? So I don't know if you can give your thoughts about this, okay? If you think it would be feasible, what will be required to be able to build a mini version of the Amstrad CPC with the current technology we have?
Well, I suppose it would be possible to shrink the chips on the CPC into maybe 1 or 2 chips, but I don't know anybody who's done that yet. However, I think I've heard that there is a CPC emulator for the Raspberry Pi, and that's a very small computer.
Okay, someone is asking, what do you think about this second era of the Amstrad CPC, where so many people, okay, is aware of the computer? There are many development groups currently developing video games. Were you aware of this, and what is your thoughts? What are your thoughts about this?
I became aware of the interest in the CPC as a retro computer only about 2 years ago. I know this has been going longer than 2 years, and also Retro Alicante's been going longer than 2 years, but I hadn't heard of them. So I was quite surprised, but very pleased to see people interested in the CPC. Now, when we were selling the CPC, there were perhaps 50 other computers on sale in the UK. I mean, for example, one you may have heard of is called Oric. Okay? And back then, 40 years ago, nobody knew which ones were going to be successful or which ones people would suddenly become interested in 30 years later. But it just, just one of those things. The CPC is probably the computer with the most retro interest at the moment.
Okay, I like this question. Which feature would you like to, in the past, you would like to include into the Amstrad CPC, but you couldn't because of the time constraints and so on? What would you like to have included in the CPC that was not included?
Well, I think the one thing that people kept asking for was sprites, but we didn't have the time or the budget to develop a video chip with sprites in from the beginning in the length of time that we had available. So we had to use an off-the-shelf video controller which does what it does. Apart from that, I can't think of many things that I would later have wanted to put in the 464, because I would have put it in the 6128, and there's nothing excitingly different about the 6128 other than the fact it's got more RAM in it, so we couldn't really think of any more to put in it.
Estoy comentando que creo que, bueno, hay una pregunta aquí que ya la voy a dejar en el tintero yo porque creo que es muy complicada para hablarla aquí, pero que sería muy interesante Sí, hacéis preguntas vosotros y se las transmitimos. Okay, Roland, this question is from your opinion, okay? Which was the best system at the moment, okay? You designed the Amstrad CPC, but do you think there were a more powerful or some other computer has a better characteristic or feature that make it like the best computer? You know, the Commodore MSX or Sinclair or whatever. Do you think there was another machine with something better than the Amstrad?
There were certainly machines that were more expensive that had more features in. The problem is, if they're more expensive, people can't afford to buy them. So what good is it? You know, the best car in the world is a Rolls-Royce, but not everyone can afford to buy one.
The question is, why does the Amstrad use 3 inches disc instead of the 3.5, which is more common and cheaper and so on?
Well, this is a very good question, has been asked many times. When we wanted a storage device for the CPC, in fact, the 3.5-inch disc hardly existed. It would only be 3 years later that IBM would choose it and therefore make it a world standard. So when we chose the 3-inch floppy, say 3 years before IBM chose the 3.5-inch floppy, it's because I looked at the alternatives. So there was the 3-inch floppy, there was a 2-inch floppy, which was like the black 5.25-inch but shrunken, and there was a tape device a bit like the Sinclair microdrive. And of the three, I chose the 3-inch disc because it was the most reliable, the most robust, and in fact about a third of the price of a 3.5-inch disc. It would be no good trying to ship a 3.5-inch disc then for the CPC if it would double the price of the computer, because no one would be able to afford to buy it.
It's true that CPC was inspired in Elan's Enterprise in any time?
Yes, I think the style of the keyboard was inspired by the keyboards at the check-in desk at the airport, so people would recognize it and think, well, that's a real computer. And the complete opposite, for example, for the Sinclair Spectrum, so it doesn't matter whether you think it's a good computer or a cheap computer, it doesn't look like a real computer.
Hello, Mr. Perry. Nice to meet you. I would like to... I publish homebrew games for Amstrad CPC, and it's almost impossible to find disc, 3-inch disc. It's really, really difficult and expensive to find and publish games on disc. Is possible any clue of where those makes were done, the molds, or a way to find if there is any way to rebuild these discs again? Thank you.
I think it would certainly be possible for somebody to produce replicas of the 3-inch discs, because even if you had to 3D print the cases and cut up bigger discs to make the magnetic media inside, you could probably do that. If I wanted to get hold of lots of 3-inch disk drives, I think I would be scouring eBay and car boot sales, particularly for people who had PCW, because that uses the same disk, and anyone who had a PCW for 5 or 10 years will probably have 100 floppy disks that they don't use anymore, so you need to find those people and buy the disks off them.
It's true, but in eBay, the discs are super expensive. And I have found that many of them are faulty. Okay? For my experience, tapes are still work, okay? They last much longer than this. Okay, Roland, so the question is, in the moment that the Amstrad CPC was being designed and created, which was more important? Having a game to play games, or having a computer in order to develop, to do productive tasks, okay? Word processor, you know, what was the primary reason or target? Games or other tasks of mathematics and so on?
I think the business software, because we had a small spreadsheet and a small word processor, were really just games, but for business people. Does that make sense? And most of the computers were sold to parents who bought it for their children so that they could learn about computers. And lots of people I've met have said, it was my first computer, my whole career started when I had that computer. And that's why in those days people bought computers for their children. If they wanted to buy something just to play games, they'd probably bought a console, not a computer.
They are asking about the prototypes, those 50 ones, okay, but also the 2 or 3 that were done in the beginning. There are several questions, no? One of them is, do you know where they are? Because here we have in Spain, we have the number 17, but do you know of any other? And also, if you know which was the version that first arrived here in Spain, if it was one of those 50 or one of the previous prototypes, if you are aware of this. Maybe you don't know anything.
I used to have a list on a piece of paper which had 1 to 50 and who had that computer, because when they'd finished writing their game or converting their game, we would collect it back and give it to somebody else. Okay? I don't know where that list is. I do not have a copy of that list. Okay? I know of the existence of maybe 2 of the first 5 computers, but I need to check with the people who I think may still have them. And today, I know of 3 of the 50 computers, one of which is number 17. But now that people are becoming more interested, then I can make more inquiries of people and say, have you seen one of these? Do you have a friend who has one of these? Maybe we can... It's like discovering an old car in a barn somewhere. You know, they do turn up from time to time.
Hello, Roland. Nice to meet you. One question. Why the CPC Plus was not a 16-bit computer?
It would have been a big development project, and we were also very busy on other things, and so really all we could do is just make better versions of the 8-bit computers.
The question is about the naming of the 464, okay? It's clear for us that the 64, it means 64 kilobytes, but what about the 4, the first 4 in the number? Is it because of anything?
It's because every product that Amstrad made had a prefix. So the 4 just means this is something in their catalogue in the 400s. All right, and the 664 and the 6128 are products in their catalogue in the 600s, and the PCW, which was the 8256, is in their catalogue in the 8000s. So it's just a numbering system that they had. It's also kind of symmetrical, 464, so it kind of, you know, it sounds nice.
Do you know if there was a previous series, number 2 or 1, before the 4th? You know?
Well, not computers. It would have been hi-fis or televisions or video recorders or something like that.
Okay, in an interview you did for Retro Gamer in United Kingdom, it looks like you talked about a project which was called Arnold number 2, okay? Can you tell us what it was about or how it ended?
Well, the Arnold number 2 was a hybrid computer which would have been compatible with the PCW word processor, but with colour, and also with the 464, so it would run software from both of them. All right? And you'd have like a big switch on the side that said, today be a CPC, or today be a PCW. Well, I think it's probably a software switch, but, you know, we'll call it a switch on the side. So we were working on that project, but we were just so busy. This is one of the things people don't necessarily understand, is you have 20 people working for you in your lab, and you can only be doing 6 projects at the same time. And when project number 7 comes along, then it just becomes impossible. So of all the time I was there, that was the only product that we cancelled about halfway through the development, because we simply didn't have enough time to bring it to market.
Well, that's all. Roland, thank you very much for your time and for being here.